Giorgio Armani is one of the biggest names in fashion. The brand is synonymous with style and luxury, but I was curious how that translated to their New York City restaurant, the Armani Ristorante. The establishment is an upscale Italian eatery, and I had a multi-course lunch to find out if the restaurant is worth it. Today I'm here in Central Park, and visually it's a beautiful day, but how it feels is another story because right now New York and much of the US is in a heat wave. Right now the temperature is in the 90s with the heat index measuring to over 100, and to my friends who abide by the Celsius scale, that translates to hot as hell. However, I still felt that I should get out. I'm not going to let the weather boss me around, and I felt like having Italian food. So I went to the Armani restaurant, which is a fine dining Italian spot. It's a place that I've always been intrigued about. Now, designer restaurants are becoming quite popular these days. In fact, these big, luxurious fashion brands are not pulling any shortcuts when it comes to food. For instance, Gucci has partnered with the 3 Michelin-starred chef Massimo Bottura for some of their restaurants. There's also Dior, who has partnered with chef Dominic Crenn, who also has 3 Michelin stars. Plain and simple, a lot of these designer restaurants are more than just places that are an extension of the brand's identity, but rather are ending up as culinary destinations. However, it's pretty clear that a lot of people these days are going to these designer restaurants for the designer clout and to post those pictures on Instagram. I mean, when I went to the Louis Vuitton restaurant last year, that place is practically designed for social media. Now, having said that, I still had a good meal at the Louis Vuitton restaurant, and I was hoping today to have the same from the Armani establishment. So having said that, this was my lunch at the New York City Armani restaurant. The Armani Ristorante is located on the Upper East Side along Madison Avenue, one of the prime luxury shopping streets in New York City. The restaurant is part of the Armani flagship store, but has a separate entrance from the clothing and home departments. It was at the end of 2024 that the current establishment opened for business, but Armani actually had a restaurant presence in the city since 2009 on Fifth Avenue in what will soon become the new destination for Gucci. The world's first Armani restaurant opened in 1998 in Paris with the Emporio Armani Café. Since then, over 20 Armani branded restaurants have opened around the world, from the Doha airport in Qatar to Tokyo. The Armani Ristorante in Paris even has a Michelin star. Without a doubt, I was excited for my meal at Armani, not only for the food, but also for the AC. It was hot out. I arrived to the restaurant right when it opened at 12 for a weekday lunch. After checking in, I was soon seated at an excellent table right along the massive windows overlooking Madison Avenue. The restaurant itself was nice. It was sleek, dark, and emblematic of the Armani design aesthetic. Now, it wasn't quite as fun and as highly branded as the Louis Vuitton Cafe, but there were still a number of touches to remind one that you're dining in an Armani establishment. Overall, I liked the feel of the place. However, it was also concerning that for nearly my whole lunch, I was the only customer in the restaurant. Now, I'm sure New York's heat wave played a big part in that, but it was still unfortunate to see. Although, it's kind of cool to think that I literally had the whole restaurant devoted to me for nearly my entire meal. After settling in, I first took advantage of the hot towel I was provided, and then I began to explore the menu. The restaurant offers both a la carte as well as a few prix options. I decided to choose the 4-course prix menu for $115. The a la carte prices were no doubt costly, but in terms of value, the prix sounded like the way to go. Regarding the culinary offerings, there was a good variety in terms of appetizers, pasta, mains, and dessert. There was also a special list that pointed out signature dishes of the restaurant. In terms of beverages, the selection was presented on a tablet. There was a good variety of options, but my choice was partly based on the steamy hot weather of that day. When I saw the wide array of spritzes, I knew instantly that I needed to have one. I ended up choosing the Hugo Spritz, which contains Saint Germain, Bianca Vigna Prosecco, mint, and soda. Now that drink truly hit the spot. For that day, it was just what I needed. The beverage was light in terms of its alcohol content, but the flavors were pleasant and nicely balanced. The mint and soda were supremely refreshing. To put it simply, I was very pleased with my beverage choice. First up in terms of food was the bread, and I was presented with 3 different varieties. There were slices of sourdough, breadsticks, and crispy flatbread. On the side, I was given olive oil along with a nicely monogrammed seaweed butter. First, I tried one of the breadsticks, which was good for a breadstick. It seemed to have a light Parmesan flavor and was certainly nice to snack on. Next, I tried the flatbread, which I really enjoyed. In fact, that one proved to be my favorite out of the 3 breads that I received. It was super light and crispy with a sort of olive oil flavor and a nice pop of sea salt. Then I sampled the sourdough, which was on the mark. Plus, that bread paired nicely with both the olive oil and seaweed butter. Not long after I received the bread, I was presented with a trio of canapes. They all looked good and had their own unique plate, which was a nice touch. The first bite I tried, I completely forgot what it was, but it was pleasant. The next amuse was a sort of caviar tart, which I enjoyed as well. Finally, there was a sort of toast with a salmon tartare, which proved to be another fine bite. Overall, that was a solid start to my lunch. Now, those bites didn't quite have the same depth of flavor that you would expect from amuses at, say, a Michelin-starred restaurant, but I still enjoyed them. Plus, compared to the Louis Vuitton restaurant, where all I received was some mediocre bread to start off my meal, the Armani restaurant was so far pulling ahead. Soon enough, I was presented with the first course. I decided to go with the beef tartare, which came with saffron tostadas and black garlic mayonnaise. The dish certainly looked good, and from a flavor standpoint, it delivered as well. The beef was tender and light, plus I really enjoyed the richness provided by the garlic mayo. The saffron tostadas added a nice crunch. However, while one of the tostadas was texturally on point with its crisp, the other 2 felt a bit tough and somewhat stale. Now, it didn't ruin the dish, but it's an unfortunate occurrence for what was mostly a fine example of beef tartare. After finishing, it was time for the pasta course. I went with the gentile spaghetti, which contains squid, mullet botarga, and sea urchin. My server said that it was her favorite pasta on the menu, and I was certainly eager to give it a go. Now that was a fine pasta dish. It didn't disappoint. First off, the spaghetti was cooked to a perfect al dente, and the entire dish tasted of the sea. I loved the creaminess of the sea urchin and the saltiness of the botarga. Basically, that pasta contained a lot of components that I've always enjoyed, so it's not too much of a surprise that I really liked it. In fact, that was probably my favorite dish of the whole meal, but it's a close call between that and my dessert. In the meantime, however, I had my main to contend with. I chose the grilled halibut with buttered sautéed spinach, English peas, and preserved lemon. As with my previous courses, it was a nice looking dish, and I was eager to try it. Overall, I thought that the dish was pretty good, but nothing particularly special. I tend to prefer stronger flavors, and that creation was definitely on the lighter side in that regard, but others may find it more suitable to their palate. The halibut was at least nicely cooked, and it was flaky and delicate. The elements besides the fish were good and well executed, but I just wanted something a little more. Basically, it would have been nice to have something on that plate which could have really made it pop. To sum it up, that halibut was good, but I just thought that it could have been a bit better. After finishing, it was on to dessert, but before I was presented with the dish I ordered, I was given a sort of palate cleanser, and it was a very interesting one. I received a scoop of white asparagus ice cream with lemon zest and a bit of crumble. Yeah, I've never had asparagus ice cream before, and frankly, asparagus isn't the first thing that comes to mind when I consider tasty ice cream flavors. Still, I'm always excited to try new things, and I always keep an open mind. In fact, at the
modern, I was served celery ice cream, and likewise, I never thought that it could work as ice cream, but I loved it. Fortunately, the asparagus ice cream proved to be quite tasty. Now, the asparagus flavor was there, it was not subtle, but the other components of the dish helped balance everything out. I liked it. Plus, I appreciated having something that was so unique. Now, I don't think it would work quite as well being sold as a pint of ice cream on store shelves, but as a sort of transitionary small dessert, it did its job. Finally, I was presented with the official dessert. I ordered the tiramisu, which was nicely monogrammed. Compared to Louis Vuitton, the Armani restaurant was a bit more restrained when it came to stamping their logos all over their food and beverages. Although, let's face it, a lot of people go to these designer restaurants mainly for their name and for their Instagrammability. Regardless, I was hyped to try that dessert, and it didn't disappoint. That tiramisu was the definition of perfection on every level. It was smooth and creamy with a well-balanced flavor. Basically, it was everything you could want with a tiramisu, complete with a look perfectly suited for a designer restaurant. Now, of course, coffee would have been an ideal pairing with the dish, but I always enjoy having coffee at a cafe where I can really linger, either getting work done or reading a book. And to stick with the designer theme of the day, I had my afternoon coffee at Ralph's, which is the Ralph Lauren coffee shop. Yes, I had hot coffee and drank it outside. Like I said, I wasn't going to let a little heat boss me around. After I finished the tiramisu, I was presented with a few tasty petit fours to conclude my meal. Overall, I had a mostly positive experience at the Armani restaurant. While it may not be as Instagrammable as the Louis Vuitton cafe, most of the food was pretty good. After finishing the petit fours, I figured I would be handed the bill. However, I was very generously presented with a glass of Prosecco. The reason for that generosity, I was told, was in part because it was a slow day, it was very hot outside, and the July 4th holiday was approaching, so it seemed appropriate to celebrate. That Prosecco definitely hit the spot, and I was indeed very grateful for it. Finally, it was time for the bill, which totaled to $148.07, but with my tip, I spent a bit over $178.
So that was a pretty good meal. Now, it wasn't perfect, but overall, I had a fine time at the Armani restaurant. Plus, I felt like I got decent value from the place, especially when I compare it to the meal I had at Louis Vuitton, where I spent a lot more and got a lot less food. Although, I definitely had more wow moments with the food I had at the Louis Vuitton restaurant, whereas with the Armani restaurant, the food was good, I just wasn't blown away by it. Plus, the Louis Vuitton restaurant definitely did a better job with regards to making the experience more Instagrammable. For me, however, designer logos and branding, they're not the biggest factor when it comes to my enjoyment at a particular restaurant. Food and flavors always take precedence for me over mere aesthetics. And the food and flavors at the Armani restaurant were pretty good. Although it wouldn't be the first Italian fine dining restaurant that I would recommend, it's still nevertheless a pretty good spot. Now, it was kind of upsetting to see the restaurant empty for nearly my entire visit. Now, to be fair, like I said earlier, it is a very hot day today, and I'm sure most restaurants are struggling to get customers in. On the flip side, regardless of weather, it's a very hard time for restaurants right now. With these rising food costs and inflation, restaurants are struggling. Now, to be honest, seeing the Armani restaurant struggle to get customers in doesn't quite pull on the heartstrings like it would for me seeing a small independent mom and pop shop struggle for customers, but still, nevertheless, it's not a good thing to see. Hopefully, the lack of customers was just mainly due to the weather, but nevertheless, it is a hard time for restaurants out there. To sum things up, I had a pretty good meal today. The food was solid, it was nothing special, but satisfying nevertheless. The service was great and the atmosphere was on the mark. If you're after a fine dining Italian meal, well, you could definitely do worse in New York City. To sum things up, I wouldn't mind going back to the Armani restaurant. It wasn't bad.